This is the podcast. It's called the Write Right Podcast. It's your weekly pep talk on living the writing life. My name is Elon.
I'm John.
And I'm Craig.
And today we're going to be talking about something that might be controversial because of the nature of the very work that we do. Today we're going to be talking about going outside. Because we talked about, outreach online, we've talked about community online, we've talked about digitally marketing your book, but what about non-digital communication? This means going to bookstores, to readings, to actually meeting people at cafes, to going to conventions, to going to literary events in your town, or, genre events, wherever they may be. And there are a lot of different takes on this, and I think that this is going to be particularly interesting because just looking at the notes, it sounds like the three of us have fairly different experiences and limitations or desires vis-a-vis going outside as a writer. So I will say this. I've recently had my very first convention experience. I went to FogCon, which is Friends of Genre Con, just outside of San Francisco, and it's really focused on inclusion. It's a fairly small convention, and I had a wonderful time. I met a large group of people who invited me into a Slack group, and it has just been like, I felt like it was a level up experience for me. Like it was the difference between me being a hobbyist writer at home and joining a larger community. Even though I've already joined one online, there was something about doing it in person that really felt like I had taken the next step. But I know that's not the case for everyone. So how do you guys feel about going outside?
Well, I have been to a con as a published author. Without giving away my author pen name, I will say that it's of the genre where the characters take their clothing off pretty quick. Sorry, I have a cat that's digging into the couch next to me.
These cats and their cameos.
What was I saying? Yes, so I write the genre where people take their clothes off pretty quickly, which can be kind of awkward to go to a public author convention and say, hey, I write this stuff. And the first con I went to as an author, I read an excerpt of this rather dirty novel to a room full of older women, and one of them very exuberantly gave me advice of how to make it even dirtier.
Nice.
After it was done. It was really interesting, though, because I got that experience of people coming up to me and saying, I read your book, I loved it so much, and it's like I had postcards, and it's like, can you sign this postcard? It was really interesting. Kind of fulfilling, kind of also unreal. It was very confusing in many ways. That being said, I honestly don't think I'll do it again, partly because it's very draining. It takes a lot of energy out of me, and I think I was sick by the end of the weekend, as I often am at the end of writing conventions. I've been to a few of them.
There's something about catching a plague there that happens.
Yeah, and so there is that risk. And then also, being the type of author that writes stories where people take their clothing off, I kind of get uncomfortable finding out how excited some people get by my stories, and it's like I don't really want to have those conversations. That I've had some very interesting experiences. In that one place where I read the excerpt, there was a much older woman who I think she was a retired school librarian, also read an excerpt from her book immediately after mine, and it was filthy. Absolutely filthy. And I was so uncomfortable. Yeah, cons make me uncomfortable as an author of my genre.
All right.
And I've had mixed experiences. I've been to a few conventions. Also did go as a published author, although I think the term was talked up a lot higher than I thought. At the time, I said, oh, I'm a published author, because a small publisher had offered me a contract on a very short piece I'd written, and it's no longer available. But, it got me out there into the scene and sort of, so my experience, though, going to this convention where I am a quote-unquote published author with this short story, and it was kind of embarrassing because I was there to promote myself, and yet you have all these other people who have like these full length books written, and they're authors. They've got a platform. Sometimes they have like table with all these books and all these fans coming, and I had no idea what I was doing.
Just imagine John on the same panel as Robert J. Sawyer.
Which I have been on.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've been on the same panel with him, and in fact, we were there as editors. This same publisher is the one I apprenticed with as an editor. And this was kind of a mistake. I really wasn't supposed to be on that panel, but my publisher was sick, and I had to take her place because she had the table. So I was there critiquing Slush Pile, this green in the gills editor, and I've got all these editors, including Robert J. Sawyer,
Oh my god.
saying why they stopped reading, and I'm like, I didn't like the repetition of this.
That sounds mortifying. That sounds scarring.
It was scarring. Now, the one good thing is Robert J. Sawyer. He kind of took to me. He actually bought a copy of my
That's nice.
short story. I don't know if he ever read it. I emailed him to follow up and never heard back. So I'm assuming with authors they are busy and they probably screen how they respond. But at any rate, the support he offered at the convention was definitely great because he helped me to sort of see that there's so much more to writing than what you're doing now, and if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have made some choices later on that's like, what, I'm gonna get into do my own editing company, and I'm gonna look at how to build myself up as a writer and break in on a different level. So I could say definitely with conventions, I love the idea of going to them as a writer, just going to hang out with writers with no agenda. And when I think about my future plans with publishing, however those might look, it's definitely not I have no intention to go to a convention to look for agents, to meet publishers, to get my book published, to meet readers. If I go to conventions, it's going to be just for fun. And I might even dress up as a Star Trek officer or something like that, or make up some funny name and just pretend to be some guy who scribbles in his book occasionally, and learn from people and get to know them. So that's my take.
Yeah. I think that there's something really poignant about your experience and your resulting resolution. The going to the press of a convention with the intention of selling or yourself, your book, or whatever, is necessarily stressful because for you it's there's this transactional element that will likely color every conversation you have there, and it's when I went to the convention that I went to, there were a lot of people who were kind of like shopping their pitches. But I focused on, and it was my first time, so I don't know how the next convention I go to is going to feel. I know that I'm going to be going to more. I already have a membership for Worldcon in Helsinki this year. Like I'm doing this all wrong. I went to one convention, so I'm going to Worldcon.
That's good though. Worldcon is a good one to go to.
It's going to be insane. I got my Airbnb all settled for Finland. And just prior to that, I'm going to be spending a week on the Writing Excuses cruise. So I'm going diving straight into the deep end. It's going to be absolutely outrageous. And I am, it'll be what it'll be. And I have this idea that hey, maybe I'll meet like an agent or an editor that likes what I've got to say. But my intention in going is explicitly to meet like-minded people who write, who enjoy writing, to expand my network, but not in a professional capacity, in a social writing world capacity. I loved meeting writers and talking to writers and learning about the way that they approach the craft and learning about how they condense ideas out of the ether. And I just found the environment so inspiring that I wanted immediately to go and just meet more writers and just chat people up at cafes and be like, so what you writing about? What's up? But that's like creepy and you shouldn't do it, so don't do that. But there's non-convention things you can do to go hang out outside. Do any of those interest you? Like, local writing groups, meetups, reading events at local genre bookstores, whatever. Like, does any of that stuff appeal to you?
Well, we have a writers group that we go to that I find quite helpful. It's the two of us plus one other person consistently for 5-6 years now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And then we have another one that comes semi-regularly. We've got another guy that started out. So I do like that sort of outing. I generally don't go to... We have a really good bookstore here in the city that does a lot to promote local authors, but my one criticism of them is that they are not friendly to genre writers. So if you write sci-fi or romance or anything like that, they're not really friendly to you.
They're only about serious literary fiction kind of thing.
Yeah, like fantasy is the one genre that they might take a bit seriously, but for the most part, they're not genre friendly. And that's sort of what the book culture in this city has sprouted from, I think. So being a genre writer, I don't find it a very welcoming city, unfortunately, for genre writers, even though it has a really strong literary culture here in the city. Like we have this really strong literary culture. We have, I think, like 2 or 3 book festivals.
You guys should open a genre bookstore. No
We
pressure,
should.
whatever.
There are actually a couple of genre bookstores in the city, but well, just a mystery one. Yeah, so I
Future
don't
business
really,
plans.
Yeah, I don't really.
That's one of my secret dreams is to own a genre bookstore. A bookstore / like event space. And the Octopus Literary Salon, which I mentioned a few episodes ago, is like the perfect amalgam. They have food, beer, when they're hosting reading events, and it's just like a mellow space, and it feels very homey to go there. You feel like you're walking into somewhere that understands you without having to explain yourself, and that's something that's really nice about finding that space. But the reality is that these types of writing is a strange thing. I don't know if this is if I'm like meandering too far off the topic right now, so please wrangle me if I start going too far. But writing as a solitary act is one thing. But writing in a way is also kind of egotistical act, and that puts us at very great odds with the fact that most of us are introverts and incredibly judgmental of ourselves and our creative work. Because on the one hand, I have a story to tell, and it's good enough that other people want to read it. And on the other hand, you have, I am shy, and I don't want anyone to ever look at my work. And when you go to a writing convention or to a writing group or to a reading and you start to talk to people about your work, you're like combining this state of excitement about your personal creative endeavors and terror at expressing those creative desires and experiments to strangers. It's a wild thing. It's a conundrum. But I found that kind of like fight or flight thing that started happening to me at the convention. I found it electrifying. And the reason why I think I found that convention so good was because it was so heavily focused on craft, and it started with writing exercises, and it was very direct in its approach to talking about writing, as opposed to kind of like highfalutin chances for people to sort of sell themselves to each other. It was like, let's sit down and write for 75 minutes. And that was awesome. I was in a room full of people writing, and it was amazing. And I'm really hoping to get that. I mean, I know I'm going to get that out of the Writing Excuses cruise because it's a writing workshop. It's a retreat, not a convention. I don't think that'll happen at Worldcon. I think it's going to be a lot of the business of writing. And so I'm eager and a little bit nervous about what's going to happen there. But I think that coming out of the writing intensive, going into the business intensive will also be a very interesting transition. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. We'll see.
John, what was the convention we went into in Toronto?
Oh, I was just going to mention that actually. We went to World Fantasy because as you're talking about, like, that's a really good point that there are kind of two types of conventions, and one is there's ones that are geared towards writers, which you'll find as a writer there's a lot of room for growth. You could learn a lot, meet other writers, and then there's ones that tend to be more geared towards readers, and so there'd be like often they might have cosplay. So they're more fan-oriented things, and they might still have a component of writing craft and things for the writers there because there's going to be a lot of writers showing up to meet with fans. But it's important to know that in what con you're going to go to. The one that we went to, say that was end of 2012, was World Fantasy, and it was in Toronto. And I mean, initially we had no idea what it was going to be, but a lot of the panels were just they didn't interest us. They were editors talking about, they were tossing all kinds of names of books and authors and trends, and like we got up and left with 20 minutes, had no idea what they were talking. It was so hard to follow. And
we spent most of the convention in the hotel lobby writing by the fireplace.
Which is cool. That was cool. But the one thing that made that trip worth it was when I found out that Brandon Sanderson just showed up with his magic cards. and so I went and got a copy of The Emperor's Soul, and he was signing books, and so I have got him to sign it, and I met him, and I have a picture of me with him. It was so cool.
Nice.
That was awesome. So, I mean, I've had mixed experiences with conventions, and I definitely think it's about just making sure you go there with the mind that you're going to have fun as a writer. And I think sounds like your approach with cons is very much along those lines. It's not sort of with an agenda where you may go and really just stress yourself out a lot.
And I find that authors, and this is where I think there's a bit of a writer/author distinction. I find people that go to conventions as authors tend to bring their ego with them, and I hate to make a statement like that because it shouldn't be a blanket statement, because people are people and they bring who they are. But when I go to a convention as an author, I find that I'm suddenly put in competition with these other people that call themselves authors, and there's a whole lot of ego being thrown about. And I stress that's not everybody. That is a few specific. But
there's a strong
people.
Vibe of it.
And so for me, that ruins a convention.
Yeah.
If I go to a convention again, I'd go as a writer. I wouldn't really mention my publishing credits to anybody unless they specifically ask. Because if you go as a writer, then there's less ego there. You might still see, you will meet some people with ego, but there's less of that competition.
Yeah, there was a writer at one of the conventions we went to that was telling me about the time he met George R. R. Martin at a convention. Because he goes to a lot of conventions, and he didn't know who he was. And he was already a New York Times best-selling author. I think he had 3 books out, or was into the 3rd Song of Ice and Fire book. But this guy had no clue who he was, just this really friendly, jolly man. Sat down and he introduced himself, said, "So what do you do?" He says, George R. R. Martin said, "I like to scribble." And there was a guy beside him who said, "Don't you know who that is?" It's like George R. R. Martin, and then it changed. But,
yeah.
I mean, even George R. R. Martin on his blog will say, when you see me at a convention, don't talk about writing. Don't talk about my book. Talk about football or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point when you're going out there as a writer and getting outside. Yes, it's great to connect to readers and stuff, but that can happen organically, and your focus is on just creating community and connecting. Well, that's a whole lot better.
It comes down to this. Oh, sorry.
All that being said, I did meet my first publisher at a convention, and I got my first publishing deal because of a convention. But
it was secondary. We didn't go there with that intention.
So I did want to at least acknowledge that, because that does happen at conventions, but I didn't go with that intention. It just sort of happened out of conversation.
That plays in perfectly to what I was about to say, and that is that if you go there, if you go to anywhere, it could be a cafe, it could be a convention, it could be the Moon, it could be, you know, Manhattan, Fifth Street of Manhattan, to just like wave your manuscript outside of that building. If you go there with the intention to sell something, people can see that. If you go there and you're authentic and you're interested, and the thing you're selling is not even necessarily the furthest thing from your mind at the time, but pretty far down the list, after things like genuine interest in who you're talking to, desire to learn more about the people in your community around you. Those kinds of things, they play real well in the selling game. Authenticity is like super valuable. And not authenticity for selling's sake, authenticity for authenticity's sake. I'm sure the reason why that sale came about was because you were having a meaningful interaction with someone, and then it turned naturally to this event where you would sell something. But like, I don't know, I don't know any agents, and I don't know any editors for any of the large companies, but I can't imagine any of them are particularly happy when someone like chases them to an elevator, gets in the elevator with them, and starts pitching a book. Like, I don't think that's a thing, even though it's called an elevator pitch. Like, probably don't do that to people. Like, how would you feel if you were just like accosted by someone, and it wasn't just like once, it was like many thousands of times a week digitally, and then every time you go anywhere in public that is within your professional wheelhouse. So it's just kind of like, have consideration and change the intent of why you're there. Go there to learn, go there to play, go there to meet, go there to have a good time, whatever that might mean for you. Because that's what I intend to do, and I've found that by bringing the person that I would like to hang out with as myself, like the person who's like, oh, what are you writing about? And then listen for 30 minutes. Like, I would way rather talk to that person than someone who's like, let me tell you my amazing pitch. Wouldn't you buy that? Like, that's not, I don't know, that's not someone that I would want to talk to at a convention, so I don't want to be that guy either. But yeah, so we're approaching time. But like, check Meetup. Meetup is a good place to find writing groups. Go to cafes. A lot of places in town here, they'll post, like, writing groups post flyers. Reach out to people you've talked to online on Twitter who are local and be like, hey, do you guys have a writing group? If that's something that you're interested in. Otherwise, don't do it. It's totally chill. Like, if going outside isn't your thing, don't feel obligated to do it. I've found that it has benefited me. I think a lot of other people have found that it has benefited them, but it is by no means a requirement for you. So don't let me catch you saying that I told you had to do it, because that's misrepresenting my words, listener, and I don't appreciate that at all. Do you guys have any final thoughts before we wrap up the old recorder?
Sure, I have one actually. Well, the whole topic of this episode is go outside. If you are like a painful introvert, like I often am, there are ways to go outside without actually going outside. You can have writers groups online. I know John was part of a Skype-based writers group for a while. And there are some really good, helpful writing forums as well. I will make the one recommendation. If you write romance or erotica, there's a site called dirtydiscourse.com, and they have a forum. You have to pay to be part of the forum, but it is the most helpful writing forum I've ever been a part of, and there's no ego there, there's no attitude, there's no fighting.
I bet that's because of the pay. I bet when you pay to be a part of that group, you take it more seriously. That's a really interesting approach.
And they also kick you out if you cause any trouble.
Oh, wow. So that's really awesome. It's called Dirty Discourse?
dirtydiscourse.com.
Very cool.
It is more erotica oriented, but romance as well. But I'm sure there are other such forums for genres. I know Nathan Bransford's site at nathanbransford.com had a very helpful forum a few years back, and I saw he was just in the Writer's Digest Top 101 websites.
Oh, cool.
So it must still be a helpful place.
And there's always, like Reddit and a variety of Slack groups, and Twitter is an amazing place to go outside without going outside. So yeah, it's interact with the wider writing world in some capacity, because it has been. I mean, sure, there are. Anywhere you go, there will be things that rub you the wrong way, but by and large, branching out and interacting with a larger writing world has been such a pleasure for me, and it has been massively influential in my writing. So I can't recommend it highly enough. So what are we recommending? We're recommending look up a convention, right?
Yeah.
If
Are
there,
you-
I mean, I'll do it. I'll do it if neither of you minds. Look up a convention in your area. Maybe there's one taking place soon. If you're in the Bay Area, BayCon is coming up. I think it's baycon.org. If that's not your cup of tea, look up a reading group, go to a bookstore and like tap someone on the shoulder, or follow a bookstore on Twitter and then do the equivalent there. Whatever feels right to you. But please make sure that you go in disguise. Like you dress up as an outlandish thing, maybe a Star Trek crew officer, Chewbacca. That was pretty good, honestly. Like I usually need to warm up before like you heard.
Practice because I'm going to do this.
Awesome. My cat has just begun what I would call an inappropriate display near me, so I'm gonna go handle that little creature, and we're gonna sign off here. Like, Lady May, you can't just lick yourself on the table like that. It's highly inappropriate.
Bring your cat too if you're going to go.
I want you to know something. When I told her that, she looked at me like I was insane. She was like, "Of course I'm gonna do that here.
Oh, yeah.
What are you, my mom?" Yes.
That's a cat. That's a cat's personality. Yeah.
I love her. It's because I'm infected with toxoplasmosis. Anyway.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. Yeah.
I wish you all an absolutely wonderful time branching out and meeting people, or staying inside and meeting people, whatever it is that's comfortable for you. John, Craig, thank you as always for joining me. Listeners, thank you for joining us, and we will catch you on the flip side later. Is it gangster enough? You guys think I sounded really gangster just now?
That was gangster.
Maybe.
Dealing with